Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, and Jim Seibert, in the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast was made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety. I'm Jim Seibert, and I am joined with Mike Bohan and Kenny Ray, my co-hosts and friends. Today, we're going to talk about family from the road. What does that mean? How do you manage the family from the road and keeping those relationships successful? Guys, being in the military for 20 years and 3 months exactly, I wish I would have kept better track of the days so that I can always put that in there as well. There's just a lot of times that I was taken away from home, whether I was on active duty or I was with the National Guard. You know, there's schools, there's deployments, there's just separate meetings. And as you climb up the ranks, whether as senior enlisted or as an officer, it's not 1 weekend a month to, 2 weeks in the summer, like all the recruiting things used to say. When you get higher rank, there's more that's required of you. And so I was taken away from home a lot. And in the Guard, I'm also balancing a civilian job as well. And so I was working for a couple different companies and now with Marsh, and there's days of the week, 2 to 3 days a week, or every other week, being gone a full week, that you're absent in the lives of your family and in your friends back home. And how you handle that absence and stay in touch is important. So whether you are calling home, sending a text on your stops, making sure that sometimes you pick up a gift. My daughter is 14 years old now, and I remember I was down in Arkansas on a shooting competition for the all-guard shooting team, and it was Valentine's. And I picked up a monster teddy bear at Walmart. And I think I also sent some flowers home to my wife. That little extra step, my daughter still has that teddy bear. It's her favorite teddy bear in her room, and she's 14 and kind of silly now, but those extra steps, those extra thoughts, they mean something. And so after a long, hard day, it's kind of easy to say, hey, I'm just going to go to bed. I'm going to shower up, get some food and hit the rack. But taking those extra times to reach out and love on your family back home means more than you probably know. So you guys, I rambled a little bit here about my time away from home. What do you think's the most important thing? If you're an over-the-road guy or you're a gal and you're traveling a lot, the transportation, the agribusiness industry, you name it, those times away, what do you think is important when it comes to staying close and in touch with those that are back home?
Well, I'm terrible at this, to tell you the truth. When I'm on the road, if my wife was sitting here right now, she'd tell you the same thing. Yep, he's terrible at this. I'm not good. And in today's world, it's much easier to stay in touch than it was years ago. I mean, when you had to have a quarter and find a payphone, or you got to a hotel and that was when you called back or whatever. But in today's world, when it's not just you can text or call, you can video chat, you've got all this technology at your fingertips. And I'm still not good at it, but I think that's for me. And again, we say this on this podcast all the time. The three of us, we're not truck drivers. We don't put the miles on that truck drivers do. We're not away from home as much as truck drivers are, but we are on the road a lot. We are in hotels every week. And it's a challenge to not live two separate lives from yourself and your loved ones back home. It is. It's you have to work at it, and I'll just rat myself out. I'm just not very good at it. I try with just basic communication, that kind of stuff, but It's something I think you definitely have to work at. You got to be conscious of it, and you have to work at it. I know this last year on my wife's birthday, I was gone, and I actually did okay on this one. Before we left, I was like, okay, we're going to have a little party before her birthday. A couple of the boys came over and we got together and had a little get together, and then gone on the birthday. And then when we came back, I picked up some gifts on the road as well. We celebrated again when we got home. So it's just things like that. Luckily for me, I had, I don't know if the family felt sorry for her or what. There was a lot of family around that was able to then take her out on her actual birthday. But it's things like that, just making that extra effort. And like I said, sometimes I'm not very good at it, but I certainly understand the challenge of it and the challenge that our drivers in this industry face when they're out there on the road for weeks at a time, away from their families, away from their loved ones. It's something that is when they think about, well, how do we stay close with our family, whether it's their kids or whether it's their spouses, whatever that's got to be such a challenge for them. And Kenny, I know you talk about all the time on the podcast that you're the son of a truck driver. So you've lived that from the kids' perspective and seeing their dad be gone for so long. And I don't know, I can't imagine as much as I've been on the road throughout my career. I've missed football games, I've missed baseball games and basketball games and with my kids. But that's one of the things that I tried to do was be present as much as possible. But for our truck drivers, they don't have that option. You know, they're out on the road a lot more than we are. So,
and you know, guys, we intentionally do not script these conversations that we have on Driving the Line. But one thing we did do on this particular episode is, by design, we had Jim start off talking about the parallels between a military deployment and a truck driver. And you know, Jim, we always honor and pay tribute to your service, and thank you for serving our country. And there are some parallels there. And then we wanted to make the leap to talking about how this applies in the trucking industry. And as both of y'all were talking, I'm going to tell you, it just brought back a flood of memories for me. I'm the old guy on the podcast. I'm never embarrassed to mention that. I'm 63 years old. And so I say that to tell you that there are memories from my childhood that are still emotional to me today. They still touch a pain point in my life. And a lot of it was the fact that I absolutely adored my dad. I don't want to say I worshiped the ground he stood on, but I had a hero worship of my dad. And yet he was always gone. And as an over-the-road driver, you know, he when he was in, he was tired. He slept a lot. He'd only be home 2 or 3 days. And that time was very chaotic because Mother would be washing his clothes and, you know, trying to get him ready for the next time where he'd be gone, you know, 10 days, 2 weeks at a time. And I've got 3 little brothers. The 4 of us boys would just want to spend as much daddy time as we could. And yet that was, it was very limited resource. You know, I mean, physically there weren't that many hours that he was there, and you tried to cram everything into that. And one of the most, I don't want to say startling, but the first time that I ever truly realized that our life as the family of a truck driver was different than everyone else was that when I got old enough to go over and spend the night with friends whose dads worked regular jobs, and you know, we would get there and they had set meal times. Now, this is going to sound foreign to some of our listeners, but they ate breakfast at the same time every day. They ate lunch at the same time every day. They ate supper at the same time every day. That's unheard of in a trucking family. You eat when he's home. You know, I mean, I would be over at a friend's house and the dad would get home from work and they had a set routine. He would come in and he'd put his stuff down and he and his wife would talk about the day, and she would set the table and they would all sit down. And I stood almost in an observant standpoint, watching and thinking, is that how real families function? because there would be times my dad would get home at 3 a.m. and he would want supper, and mama would get up and cook him supper at 3 a.m. because that's when his day was ending. And my point about that is it's just the entire framework of a family for an over-the-road truck driver is different from people that have jobs that work regular shifts, regular routines. And so the things that go on at home are different. And I know the majority of our listeners are either drivers or people that work in the industry, but I want to encourage you, our listeners, as the old son of a truck driver, to remember that spouse back home, that significant other back home, those kids back home, number one, they love you, they miss you, they want to spend time with you. And Jim mentioned about the picking up the Valentine's Day teddy bear for his daughter. Those holidays still go on for them at home. I mean, here we are now ironically, we're in February of 2024. It's Valentine's month. So, there's drivers out there on the road that you need to think about Valentine's Days. You need to think about birthdays. You need to think about anniversaries. Mike mentioned missing football games. What are going on with your kids at school? We have some older drivers. What's going on with your grandchildren at school? What's going on in their social life? And so that time, that limited time that you are at home, remember that time is precious. I want to encourage drivers, don't come home and plop down on the couch and watch a ball game or watch TV. When that son or that daughter comes walking up with that baseball bat and that glove and say, Daddy, can we go out in the yard and play pitch? Don't say, I'm tired. Go do it. Spend that time. Because again, I'm telling you, 6 decades later, I still look back and think about all the things I missed with my dad that everybody else got to experience with theirs. It didn't make me angry at him. It didn't diminish my love or my respect for him. But there's still things even now I realize that as a child, I did not get to experience with my father, with my dad, because number one, he was always gone. But when he was home, the time was so limited, and he wasn't always a real good manager of that. And so, no, my dad's already deceased now, so there's nothing I can do to fix that. But if nothing else, if you hear the emotion in my voice, and I know we're not psychologists, and I'm not trying to be a counselor or anything else, but just know that because that time that you're home is so limited and it's so precious to your family, do everything you can to make the most of that time when you are home, because to your kids, to your spouse, to the rest of your family, it matters. It matters a lot.
There's so much emphasis put on, especially for the drivers out there that are listening to you, Kenny, about time management when they're on the road. And I think that point that you're making should ring true to so many people. It does to me, that you got to manage that time and make the most of it with your family, and you got to make them a priority, and you have to let them know, hey, you are a priority to me. I value you. As you put it so well, when you come home and you're dog tired, but then your son or your daughter or your wife say, I would like to do this. Yeah, you just got to kind of pull yourself up by the bootstraps and do it, because your family means that much. It does to me. I know that. I've been there. Like I said, I've been in those situations where it's, I didn't think I had anything left in the tank, but you just got to find it. And before, Kenny, I was going to ask you a personal question. So you've got brothers. You got 3 brothers, right?
Yep, 3 younger brothers.
How many of them ended up in the trucking industry? I know
two of them. 2 of them drive as we speak. They're on the road today. Yeah.
That's so cool. It just, to me, that I knew one did, and you've been in the industry for so many years, and you've got brothers who did. That just is a testament to how much you guys, to me, you loved your dad and you looked up to him. And it's like, well, and they ended up, seeing what he did and saying, I want to be like my dad. That's a cool part of your story to me.
Kenny, are you the oldest?
Yes.
Okay. I remember seeing pictures of your dad, and I mean, he's got a big sleeper on his on his tractor. You and your brothers, did any of you ever get to go on a trip with them?
Oh yeah, all of us did, but that was all pre Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration regulations. Okay. Most drivers can't do that today, but
yeah,
during the summer when we were boys, we'd go on trips. I've been all over the United States in the cab of a truck with my dad as a little boy and loved it. Absolutely loved it.
I think that's so awesome. And I've seen people and this was years ago at some truck stops, you know, it seemed like, hey, you're, you know, a father-daughter or father-son trip, or, you know, mother-son. I think that would be really cool for a kid. While you were talking, you kind of reminded me of a feeling that I used to have when I'd leave for a while, you know, in a little week time frame, or maybe 10 days, but absolutely at 2 weeks or a month or more for schools. When I leave my house, it's like I have a timestamp. I have a timestamp of what my family is at that moment, and that's what I take away.
Yeah.
But everything is going on at home. Life doesn't stop. The kids got everything going on. My wife is a professional in her career. She's a professional wife, professional mom, amazing home caretaker. She's got all of this stuff going on, and time marches on, except that time stamp in my head. And something that's worked well for Lacey and I didn't come up with this idea, but she created this Google shared calendar, and she's got her company that she's got her work schedule with, and I've got my company where I've got my work calendar, but together we've got everything in that Google calendar. A dentist appointment, you name it. If there's something happening with the family, the kids, Lacey or I, we put it in that calendar. And like when I'm traveling for work, it doesn't say all the details. It just says Jim out of town or oot. So she knows I'm going to be gone. But what that does for me when I'm gone is I can see everything on that schedule, and I can say, hey, son, how was the dentist today? I've been telling you better brush them teeth, you know. Hey, daughter, how was one act plays today? How was basketball practice? And staying the relevance in your wife, your kids' life by having that snapshot, that little cheat sheet every day to say, okay, that gives me something to ask about, because sometimes those phone calls, when you're not sharing commonality because you've been away for a while or you're in and out so much, sometimes that really opens the door on good conversations and staying present.
You know, Jim, before you leave that's a best practice you just shared, that, you know, technology allows today better opportunities to stay in touch. I mean, when I was a little boy, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have Zoom. My dad had to use a payphone if he was going to call home. And you never knew when that was going to be. There wasn't, you know, nowadays we send people a text and say, is this a good time to call? You know, back then the phone just rang, and if you were home, you answered it. If you weren't, you weren't. But I want to tell y'all one other real quick story. And y'all know I'm a retired state trooper. And when I first started working the road back in the 1980s, we didn't have cell phones back then. And so I would stop a truck driver and I'd do a roadside inspection on his truck. And back then, mostly men. So, and we didn't have computers. All of our roadside inspection forms were handwritten. And so, the driver would come back and sit down in the front seat of my patrol car, and I'd sit there and fill out the paperwork and be talking to him. And, and invariably when I'd ask for their CDL and they'd take their billfold, their wallet out and open it, but again, because we didn't have cell phones, so the photographs were not stored the way they are today on an electronic device. Those men would open those billfolds to get that CDL out, and there would be that little cellophane or whatever, those plastic deal with all the pictures, and you'd see them. There'd be one of his wife and kids and maybe even his folks if he was a young man. And you know that, and still to this day, I think about, if you ask somebody, what do you carry in your wallet? Most people would say, well, valuables. That's where I have my money. That's where I have my credit cards. That's where I have my driver's license. But if you put all of that stuff aside, the answer's still the same. What do you carry in that wallet? It's the valuables. It's the pictures of those loved ones back home. And, it just brought to memory that every time that man would take that billfold out, that wallet out to buy supper at a truck stop, or to get a credit card out to pay a toll or whatever he or she was going to do, there would be those pictures reminding them, here I am 1,500, 2,000 miles from home, but back home is what's really important. And if nothing else comes from this episode of Driving the Line, I just want to refresh in the memory of these truck drivers, in the mind of these truck drivers, that while you're out there making a living, and some of y'all love what you do. My daddy loved driving a truck. Only job he ever had. He loved being on the road, and he was an absolute pro at it. But don't ever forget, what's really, really important to you is what's waiting at the end of that driveway when you turn off that road and start up the hill to the house. That's what's important. And do whatever it takes to cherish that and hang on to that. Because again, particularly those kids in that house, they absolutely worship the ground you stand on. You are their hero, and they love you and they miss you when you're gone. And that time when you're home is important. So make the best of it. Like Mike said, make the very best of it when you're there.
I'm just picturing that, what you just described there, Kenny, pulling in, kids stand. I mean, I've seen videos on the internet where you'll see a truck pulling in a drive and there'll be a little bitty squirt, maybe in diapers. Just in this one that I've got in my mind, this little kid's wearing a ball cap, and he's little, like still got a diaper on, I think. And this truck pulls in, and this kid takes his hat and throws it off and goes running towards that truck as that dad stepping out of that truck. And it's just like, that's the picture of what you just described. And it's, you gotta value that. You got to value that stuff. You got to make the time. You got to make it a priority. It's, if you get time off, for me, none of us take a ton of time off, but like this year, the only time I've really taken off, it's always been about either my wife or my kids. It's like my middle son got married this year. I took a few days off there. My youngest son, he's kind of making his way into adulthood. I took a few days off and we just spent a couple of days together. It's like, it's okay to do that. It's okay to take some time and just say, I'm going to spend that valuable thing I have a picture of in my wallet. I'm going to spend some time with that. I'm going to intentionally take 2-3 days, a week, whatever. And I'm going to spend it with those people that mean so much to me. So I just appreciate you sharing that, Kenny, because it brought that video to mind of that little kid running out to that truck. And it's just like, you're right. Those kids, if you're a dad or you're a mom out there driving, your kids love you to death. And you need to know that. And we know that you love your kids as well. And just make sure that we're just giving you permission today. Hey, it's okay to spend a little time with your family. Nobody's going to do you and say, I can't believe he's taking time off. No, take some time off and love up on your kids and love up on your spouse. It's okay.
I can make so many parallels, Mike, to what you just shared there, and that the little visual thing of the little kid diapers running. I think it's harvest season, and man, they are in those tractors 20 hours a day. I think of the military deployment guys coming back, all of them about ripped my heart out of my chest. And I used to think that I was a tough guy until I saw some of those videos. Now I just try to not watch them. So I make myself feel like I'm tough. But, I guess for the listeners, the challenge from Mike, Kenny, and I is we get one trip around this earth. And the most valuable thing that we've got is in the pictures that are folded in that trifold wallet that's going to cause us lower back problems later in life. And Why do we work so hard? It's for them. So our challenge for you is, what special days are coming up? How can you show the ones that you love that you appreciate them, that you love them? How do we make up when we're present? How do we make up for the time that we're gone? Can you? Not all the way, but what you can do is make the times that you're present more special. And I know that we're going to get a lot of requests for this, so I'm just going to tell you no right now. Neither Mike, Kenny, or myself will be putting a list of marriage or relationship best practices. We will not be attaching one of those to the base of this podcast. It's not going to happen because we would mess that up too. But from us at Driving the Line, thank you for joining the podcast that's always in the pursuit of safety and healthy family relationships. We'll talk to you next time.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Until next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.